Hello, BookTube. Once again, thanks to a car, I went on adventures of book acquiring far and wide. And I have a bunch of stuff to show you of varying levels of boring. I wanted to start with something that was BookTube motivated. Lukash over at his BookTube channel, I'll leave a link down below, uh, announced in a recent video that he was doing a read along of some Shakespeare plays, and I horned my way in. I, I don't know really how read-alongs and such things work. I really don't. I will figure it out. It's one of the last remaining mysteries for me of BookTube, or not so much that I don't know how they work, is that I don't know how they can work with me. How I can join them without making everything feel awkward. Read-alongs and things like that. Uh, on BookTube, I have the same problem that I have in real life that I've had, for decades. I read much faster than a normal reader, 150 pages an hour on average, and I read much more than your average reader. I read an average of 10 hours every day. So any book that we pick, uh, I'm going to blast right through compared to people who maybe read slower or who have, lives, loved ones, meals, jobs, hobbies, school. There's not only that, it's also that I've been reading an average of 150 pages an hour for an average of 10 hours a day since 1621, something like that. So almost any book that a book club or read along picks is going to be something that I have read at least once or probably many times. And that produces an imbalance that I'm trying to figure out, because a lot of fun people do read-alongs and book groups and that in BookTube, and I don't want to be left out of those. But in the meantime, while I figure it out, Lukash has picked an odd, idiosyncratic picking of some Shakespeare plays. He's not doing all of them, and he's going to go through them all. And he mentioned in his video that the guiding text, in addition to Shakespeare, is going to be this: Shakespeare and the Invention of the Human by Harold Bloom, his Shakespeare tome. I don't really know why that is. I don't think it was ever actually addressed in the video. I'm assuming it's because Bloom's book impressed him. Especially, I don't know one way or another. It certainly did not impress me, and again, I'm not sure how read-alongs work and whether or not one slim read-along has room in it for two bloviating old brontosauruses. But one way or another, I've had this book on and off over the years, and when I saw it at the Prattle, I had to get it because, if it's going to be a reference point in a read along group that's actually been gracious enough to allow me to tag along, I should know what's in the book. I should have a copy of it. But then we did adventures elsewhere that weren't the Brattle, and I wanted to show you those, starting off with a bunch of biographies. The first one is this thing. I think I've shown it on this channel before. It's Kenneth Clark's great book on Leonardo da Vinci, just fantastic. And I have a little penguin, modern historical classic type thing, and I have over the years had this larger version of it. I think out in the biography, I either have a hardcover or a trade paperback of this very edition, which is the whole text of Clark's book, but with all of Da Vinci's art, which you really need in front of you when you're reading about him. I haven't actually checked the biography shelf to see if I have the trade paperback of this or the hardcover or whatever, but I don't mind having a double of this particular thing one way or another. I will certainly find a home for it. And the motivation for it, this was free, so basically free, 10 cents, so I grabbed it. And the motivation for it was because Walter Isaacson, the great biographer Walter Isaacson, he did a great book on Einstein. He did a biography of Steve Jobs that I think is one of the best biographies in modern times. And he seems to have a fixation with antisocial geniuses. so his next book is a gigantic thing on Leonardo da Vinci. And when I saw this, I thought, well, I'm not 100% sure what the shape is or the durability is or whatever the volume that I have, and I know that I want it and it's dirt cheap, so I got it. And then two other biographies that I remember They were dirt cheap. That's the reason I got them, to revisit them and see. I remember both of them at the time struck me as hagiography, as kind of dutiful and not very thorough. The first one is this. It's Elizabeth and Philip, by Charles Higham and Roy Mosley, both of whom are star followers and royalist spotters, and not scholars, certainly people not people who know any kind of archives at Windsor or anything else. And their book, this was from about 30 years ago, and what is it here? They paint a vivid and surprising portrait of the royal couple set against dangerous and turbulent periods in British history, drawing from newly classified documents, confidential interviews in high places, and letters from former British prime ministers. And half of that is not true. Half of that is simply false claims. They're not no newly declassified documents, no confidential interviews in high places with anybody who is still in a high place, and nothing, if I remember correctly, nothing in the book that challenges this. Certainly nothing that is, what were the words? Vivid and surprising. Vivid, yes, very chatty, full of conversation, but the untold stories, no. No, but I remember it being a very enjoyable read, and I didn't have a copy, so I grabbed it. The same thing with the next one, Hero Worship of the First Water, but an enjoyable read, and it's this, A Hero for Our Time, by Ralph Martin. It's a big fat biography of John F. Kennedy, that is likewise full of reproduced and manufactured dialogue, and that is very light on source work, very light on rigor. And that, hagiographies like this tend to give the game away fairly early. They usually do it in the subtitle. This one does it in the actual title of the book. A book that is called A Hero for Our Time is not going to be objective about its subject. But the thing that struck me about this one, this came out, when did this came out originally? I think in the 90s? No, 1983. The thing that struck me about it originally is that the hagiography is given away on both the front and back covers. Front cover is A Hero for Our Time, with a studio portrait. So that's the tip of the hat, number one. Giveaway number two is on the back. That photo is it's clearly meant to, there is no caption. That photo is clearly meant to show Camelot at its best. An affectionate moment, glowing smiles, and if you dig in to the details, as I have done more than anyone else on earth, of this photo, and you find out what the occasion was for it and what is actually being said by both people in the photo, it just blows apart the pretty picture completely. Oh, it's kind of funny. The game is always given up, but I haven't done a trot through this since it first came out. I wasn't really aware that it had been that long, but I'm eager to do it. This is the kind of rereading that I do now, is almost entirely nonfiction, except for Penguin Classics. And I hit a motherload of Penguin Classics on this little expedition, and I wanted to show them to you. I got a bunch of trades. They were all so cheap that I just grabbed everything I saw, including one I don't need, a Penguin trade of Wuthering Heights. I don't need that, but most of these others I did need in trade paperback. I'm trying to phase out my mass market Penguin Classics. And the first one of those was The Sacred Font by Henry James, a weird late novel of his that I've read biographies of James, I've read literary studies of him, I've read lots of introductions to different editions of this book, and I have never yet come across anyone who's actually willing to describe it as what it clearly, obviously was. James used to love, when he lived in England, he used to love getting invited to country houses, and with all the do's and fixins. He used to love that. Take the train, take a car from the station, the rooms, the paneling, the history, the grounds. He used to love that in a way that only an expatriated American really can. And he used to draw on those trips for raw material for his later novels, and sometimes more explicitly than others. This is simply that. It's simply an X-ray of one particular country trip that he did, that he very quickly, for him, transmuted into a novel. And the photographic representation of it and the speed with which it was done combined to make it very strange. It really, in large parts, doesn't read like Henry James at all. I'm not I'm not doubting for a minute that he wrote it, but there are large chunks of it that I think look forward to later, slightly later, English novelists who read this and might have been influenced by it. I don't know. I don't know one way or another. The other one is also Henry James, and also in perfect condition, The Ambassadors. Uh, a late novel of his. I tend not to be a fan of late Henry James, but this is one of my favorites. It's one of everybody's favorites. Just a fantastic plot, which he breaks with the pattern of his late novels by kind of sort of sticking to, which is good. It's a very good plot. And then a Boston classic. This is The Rise of Silas Lapham. That is Child Hassan. That is a rainy street in Boston. And on the cover, the painting on the cover is that. And if you're from Boston or you know Boston at all, you'll be able to take one look at that cover and know exactly where he was standing when he painted it. It looks exactly the same, except it's narrower and there's tons of traffic. And thankfully, Boston doesn't use horses as beasts of burden anymore. But this is it was in perfect condition, and it's in better shape than The Rise of Silas Lapham that I have. I think I have this as a trade paperback, but I'll gladly replace it with this one. And it's also a bit sentimental for me because just about 10 or 15 or 20 years ago, The Rise of Silas Lapham was removed from the Norton Critical Edition of American Literature, where it had been for 60 years. And that's The Kiss of Death. It's not a very long novel, and the whole of it was in the Norton Critical Edition for years and years. So students of American literature in universities all across the country had to encounter it. And if it's removed from there, that's The Kiss of Death. No one's going to read it. They're not going to keep reading it. It's not going to have the kind of life that I wish it did, because it is a masterpiece. And funnier than most people remember it. They read it in school. Not anymore now, but they read it in school and they come away thinking, well, novel of manners, old time Gilded Age Boston, and it's only later when you think about it that you realize that it's kind of funny. I think it's the best thing that one of the best things that William Dean Howells ever did, and an amazing thing. That's an amazing thing to say, because I think his genius was for nonfiction. He's surrounded by all these fictional giants. He knew every fictional giant of the day, and wrote a great book. So, and a bunch of first-rate, really good other books, too. I'm not meaning to slight A Hazard of New Fortunes, which is brilliant. And then Penguin Classic of an author that I'm still trying to warm up to. So, the more of him I find, the better. This is The Comedians by Graham Greene, his Haiti novel about, the regime of Papa Doc. With the usual trio of main characters, each one of whom is hiding something, each one of whom is standing for something. Very programmatic stuff. I read The Comedians a long time ago, and I seem to remember liking it on first reading more than I usually do Greene. Greene usually strikes me as very weak soup, and the kind of thing where you forget it immediately upon reading it. This didn't strike me that way, so I was happy to find it in a Penguin trade paperback without the olive green cover. I like the black spine penguins if I can find them. And then the last Penguin classic made me squeal with joy for just a minute, just long enough to embarrass the teenagers I was with. It's this. It's Miss Marjorie Banks by Margaret Oliphant, a great big Victorian novel by an author who's largely forgotten now, which is a terrible shame, because she writes really good books. Miss Marjorie Banks is a really good novel about a very strong-willed woman, very much in the vein of Jane Austen's Emma, who doesn't. She has every bit of Emma's fire and spirit and self-confidence, but nowhere near Emma's financial security, especially as the book goes on. And it was written by Margaret Oliphant is a fascinating character, one of the many Victorian novelists whose own lives are far more interesting than the books they wrote, as good as those books are. And she's a perfect example of that. What I wouldn't give in her own lifetime, she used to joke that the series of novels that she makes up a little town, a little English village, just like Trollope did, and she sets a whole series of novels there. And she, in her own time, she used to joke with her publisher and her friends about how the success of those novels was bringing her as close to being to arriving on the literary scene as she thought she was ever going to get. It turns out she was true, but then her reputation has vanished completely. Nobody reads her for fun anymore, and that's a shame, because I wouldn't in an alternate world, I would love it if she were known and loved, if she were broadly known and broadly loved. What a life she led! God, raising her children on her own, losing her she lost her 10-year-old daughter unexpectedly and suddenly when she was caring for her two boys and making a living on her own, and the death nearly killed her, and yet she was right back at the writing table. And I also wouldn't mind if somebody, it wouldn't be Penguin, of course, but if somebody were to reprint and annotate a gigantic volume of the writing that she did to earn her money, the writing that she did to keep the house supplied with linen and lamb chops, was her book reviewing, which is, as far as I know, never been collected. She did a mountain of it. So anyway, I had no idea that Penguin even made a Penguin Classic, Black Spine Penguin Classic of Miss Marjorie Banks, so I couldn't be happier. And then the last two things I wanted to show you, I mentioned at the beginning of this motherload of penguins that I'm trying to phase out my Penguin mass markets. That's actually true with my whole collection. I'm trying to phase out mass markets just in general. I find them uncomfortable to read. And awkward, and delicate, and every negative in the book. And so what used to be in here in Hyde Cottage used to be 10 bookcases, piled three deep, with mass markets of every kind and description. There are hardly any anymore here, and I don't miss them. I knew that I wouldn't, and I don't. But I do make an exception when I find a mass market and I see it and I think I'm extremely unlikely to find that in any other format, and I want to read it, then I grab it, of course, if it's free. And also the other category would be romance. I found a Liz Carlyle that I don't think I've read. It's called In Love with a Wicked Man. All red on the cover, and then the clothes start to come off on the inside. But the other kind of book, the kind of book I was talking about, is when you find a mass market that I'm just unlikely to see it in a trade or a hardcover. I'll grab it if I do. But if I find a dirt cheap mass market of it and I want to read it, then I just grab it. And that was this, Lenin in Zurich by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. This is a Solzhenitsyn that I don't think I've ever even known existed. So I was thrilled to find it. I may have read references to it and just blocked them out, but this is a story about the compromised Lenin. This is a story about the Lenin in exile and the deal that he made with the German powers that be to get back into Russia. And it's, that's part of any Lenin biography. It was a big part of a few Lenin books that I've read in the last year. But to read Solzhenitsyn on it, that's going to be, the icing on the cake. So I had to get this in mass market, even though I don't like the form of it. Its spine is going to crack immediately. I don't know where I'm going to put it. But anyway, so that's it. It was a great big used book haul from the provinces. I thought I would share it. But I'll be back soon. Thank you, BookTube.